People always ask me what the worst thing I ever pulled out of a reclamation chute was. They want a story, something with teeth, a weapon maybe, a body. I never tell them the truth, because the truth doesn't sound like a horror story. It sounds like a Tuesday. The worst thing I ever pulled out of that chute was a child who was still breathing. Let me back up. My name's Sam Holloway. I work the night cycle at the reclamation depot on Tier 9 of Marrow Station, and before you picture something clean and silver and humming, let me stop you. Marrow Station is not a place you see in the brochures. It's a transit hub, a way station, the kind of place where 40 different species pass through on their way to somewhere they actually want to be, and they leave their garbage behind for people like me to deal with. Tier 9 is the bottom of the stack. Gravity's a little heavy down there because of how the rings spin. Your knees feel it after about 6 hours. The air recyclers on 9 are the old kind, the ones that never quite get the smell out, so everything down there carries this faint sourness, like a wet rag left too long in a bucket. You stop noticing it after a few weeks. Then you go up to Tier 2 for a supply run, breathe the clean stuff, come back down, and it hits you all over again. I'd been doing the job 11 years. I knew that depot better than I knew my own hands. Here's how reclamation works so you understand. Everything that gets thrown out anywhere on the station eventually ends up in the chutes. The chutes feed down to us. We sort it: metal here, organics there, hazardous in the sealed line, salvage in the bins we get a cut of if it's worth anything. Then the rest goes into the crusher. Big drum-style compactor, taller than 2 men, old enough that it groans when it cycles. We call it the mouth. Don't ask me who started that. It was already called the mouth when I got there. The mouth runs on a timer. Every chute dumps, the sorting belt does its pass, and what's left rides the belt straight into the drum. You've got the length of one belt pass to grab anything you want off it before it goes in. After that, the mouth doesn't care what you meant to save. That's the part I want you to hold on to. The mouth doesn't care. So, it was the back end of the night cycle. The slow part. Most of the dumps had come through already, and I was mostly just babysitting the belt, drinking something out of a thermos that I would not legally call coffee, listening to the drum groan and reset, groan and reset. And then a chute up on Tier 6 dumped. I knew it was 6 because of the sound. Each tier's chute hits the belt at a different angle and you learn the difference. 6 is a sharp drop, heavy stuff. 6 is where a lot of the species-specific quarters are, the ones who keep to themselves, who don't mix much. The Vethin block is on 6. I didn't think anything of it. Stuff came down, packing foam, a cracked stasis crate, some kind of fabric, lots of it bundled and damp. Standard. And then the bundle moved. Now you've got to understand something. Things move on the belt all the time. Foam shifts, crates settle, liquid sloshes. Your eyes play games at the end of a shift. I'd been fooled 100 times. So when I saw the fabric twitch, I didn't even put my thermos down. It twitched again. And then it made a sound. I want to describe that sound to you properly because it's the thing I hear when I can't sleep. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't loud. It was thin. A high, broken little thread of a noise, the kind of thing makes when it's been making it for a long time and has nearly run out. The kind of sound that's already given up on being heard. I dropped the thermos. I don't remember dropping it. I just remember it on the floor afterward, and the belt was still moving, and the bundle was maybe 4 meters from the mouth, and I was already running. The thing about that depot is the belt has no fast stop near my station. The emergency cutoff is at the far end by the door. To stop the belt, I'd have to run away from the bundle. To reach the bundle, I'd have to run toward the mouth. There wasn't time to do both. So I ran toward the mouth. I got my hands under the fabric, and it was heavier than I expected and warmer than I expected, and I hauled it up against my chest, and I felt the belt edge brush my hip as I stumbled back off it. And behind me, the drum did its groan and reset, and the spot where the bundle had been was empty now, swallowed, gone. I stood there in the middle of the floor holding this damp, twitching, sour-smelling thing, breathing like I'd run a mile, and I peeled back the top fold of the fabric. And a face looked up at me. I'd seen Vethin before, plenty. They come through Marrow like everyone else. Tall, narrow people, gray-blue skin like old slate, eyes set wide and low on the face, two thin ridges where a human would have eyebrows. Dignified, I'd always thought. They carry themselves like they're better than the room. Most of the ones I dealt with wouldn't look at me. To them, I was the man who handles the garbage, and you don't look at the garbage. This face was small. A child's face, though I didn't have the experience to guess the age. I'd find out later she was about what we'd call 4. The slate skin was paler than the adults, almost silver. The wide, low eyes were open and they were looking at me, and they had the most exhausted expression I have ever seen on a living thing. She wasn't crying anymore. She'd stopped the second I picked her up. She just looked at me, like she was waiting to find out what I was going to do. Like she already knew it would be bad, and she'd decided not to fight it. I've thought a lot about that look. I've had years to think about it. A child should not know how to make that look. That look is something you learn. Somebody had to teach her that the world picks you up only to throw you somewhere worse. I unwrapped the rest of her, careful, sitting down right there on the depot floor because my legs didn't feel like holding me. And that's when I understood why she was in the chute. Her legs. I'm not going to be clinical about it because I didn't understand it clinically at the time and I don't want to pretend I did. Her legs were thin, thinner than they should have been, and they bent in a way that legs aren't supposed to bend. And when I touched her foot, just touched it gently to see, she didn't pull away the way you'd flinch. She watched my hand do it like it was happening to someone else, like the bottom half of her belonged to a different child. She couldn't walk. That much I figured fast. Whatever it was, she'd had it from the start and she'd never walked and she never would. And her people had decided that made her trash. I sat on that filthy floor for a long time. The drum groaned and reset. The belt kept moving, empty now. And I held this child who weighed almost nothing and smelled like the inside of a dumpster because that's where she'd been, and I tried to do the math on it. Somebody had wrapped her up. That's the part. You don't wrap up trash. You wrap up something you're trying not to look at while you get rid of it. Somebody had taken the time to bundle her in soft fabric, the way you'd swaddle an infant, and then carried her to a disposal chute and dropped her in. Wrapped her warm and then threw her down the mouth. I keep coming back to that. The fabric was clean before it got dirty in the chute. The folds were neat. Whoever did it had cared, in some broken sideways way, right up until the moment they let go. I didn't have a word for what I was feeling. I still mostly don't. She made the sound again, smaller, and I realized she was looking at the thermos on the floor, the not coffee, and that the sound wasn't fear anymore. It was want. She was thirsty. Of course she was thirsty. Who knows how long she'd been down that chute, or in whatever holding it had sat in before with nobody coming. I didn't have anything clean to give her, so I did the only thing I could think of. I got up, carried her to the eyewash basin in the corner, the one for chemical splashes, ran it till the water came clear, cupped some in my hand, and held it to her mouth. She drank out of my palm, slow at first, like she didn't trust it. Then fast, both her small hands wrapped around my one wrist, and she drank until I had to refill my hand twice, 3 times. And the whole time she kept her eyes on my face, watching, waiting to see if I'd take it away. I didn't take it away. I think that's the moment, if I'm honest. Not the rescue. The rescue was reflex. Anybody with hands would have grabbed her off that belt. The moment was the water. The moment I decided she could keep drinking as long as she wanted, and I watched something in her face change, just slightly, this tiny loosening, like a fist she'd been holding her whole short life had opened a single finger. I didn't sleep that night, obviously. What I did was bring her back to my quarters, which I knew was 100 kinds of against the rules, and I wrapped her in a clean blanket, and I sat on the floor next to the bunk where I'd laid her, and I watched her sleep. She slept like something that had never once felt safe enough to sleep all the way. She'd surface every few minutes, eyes snapping open, finding me, and then going back down only after she'd confirmed I was still there. Around the fourth or fifth time I started talking to her, just nonsense, low and steady. I told her about the depot, about the mouth, about the 11 years, about how my knees ached on Tier 9. She didn't understand a word. Vethin don't speak our language and I sure didn't speak theirs, but the talking seemed to do something. She stopped snapping awake so hard. The sound of a voice that wasn't going anywhere. Somewhere in there I gave her a name. I didn't plan to. It just came out. I was looking at how small she was, how she'd folded herself into the corner of the bunk like she was trying to take up less room than she did. And there was this little bird that used to get into the depot through a vent gap. A tiny gray thing that couldn't really fly right, busted wing, hopped everywhere instead. The crew called it Wren, even though none of us had seen a real wren in our lives. It was just a name somebody had. So I said it, okay, Wren. She didn't react to the name, but she reached out one hand in her sleep and got a fistful of my sleeve and held on. I want to be clear about something here because people who hear this story sometimes get it wrong. I didn't have a daughter I lost. I wasn't filling a hole. I never had kids, never wanted them much, never thought about it. I'm telling you that so you understand this wasn't me looking at her and seeing someone else. I looked at her and saw her, a person. A very small, very tired person who had been thrown away for the crime of being built different, and who had decided, somewhere in a dumpster, that this was just how the universe worked. I wanted to prove her wrong, that's all, that's the whole of it. Morning cycle came up, the lights warmed to amber to fake a sunrise, and I had to face the size of what I'd done. You can't just keep an undocumented alien child in your quarters on Marrow Station. There are 40 species here and roughly 400 regulations about who belongs to whom, and the biggest one, the one everybody on every tier knows, is the sovereignty clause. It's the rule that keeps the peace on a station this mixed. It goes like this. What a species does within its own block, under its own customs, is that species' business. Station authority does not interfere with internal cultural matters. Full stop. And the disposal of non-viable offspring, that was a Vethin cultural matter. I found that out fast because the first thing I did, the smart thing, the thing you're supposed to do, was take her to the Tier 5 clinic, the neutral one, and tell them where I found her. The medic on duty was a Corlin, squat, four-armed, decent enough I'd seen her around. She scanned Wren without a word and her face did something I didn't like. I asked what was wrong. She told me Wren was healthy. That was the thing that made her face do that. Wren was healthy, underfed, dehydrated, traumatized, but healthy. Her legs were a developmental condition, congenital, present from birth, non-progressive, the medic said, meaning it wouldn't get worse, it just was what it was. With station standard mobility supports, Wren could have lived a completely full life. A chair, braces, whatever. The technology existed. It was cheap. Half the station used some version of it. Her people had access to all of it. They threw her down a chute anyway. The medic didn't editorialize. Corlins don't. But she set her lower two hands flat on the table in a way that I later learned is what they do when they're holding something in. And she told me the part I really didn't want to hear. Under the sovereignty clause, Wren was still Vethin property, not citizen property. The Vethin don't recognize a non-viable offspring as a person under their own law. And because their law was the law that applied to her, by treaty, station authority would have to honor a reclamation request if the Vethin block filed one. Reclamation. They used the same word we used at the depot. I noticed that. Same word for a child as for a cracked crate. And if they file one, I asked. The medic looked at me with all four eyes, which Corlins only do when they want you to take something seriously. She said if they file one, the child goes back. And what they do with her after that is, legally, none of our business. I asked what they do with her. She didn't answer, which was the answer. I took Wren back to my quarters. I didn't have a plan. I had a sick feeling and a sleeping child and a job I was already an hour late for. For 3 days, nothing happened, and I let myself believe maybe nothing would. Maybe whoever wrapped her up had assumed the mouth would do its work and had no idea she'd been pulled off the belt. Maybe she was, as far as the Vethin block was concerned, already gone, disposed of, closed. I learned her in those 3 days. That's the only way I can put it. I learned her. I learned she was sharp, sharper than any 4-year-old I'd ever been around, though admittedly that wasn't many. She figured out the door panel in my quarters in an afternoon, just by watching me, and started letting herself in and out of rooms by dragging herself along with her arms, which were strong, much stronger than the rest of her, because she'd spent her whole life pulling her own weight along the ground. She was fast on her hands, faster than you'd think. I learned she hated being picked up without warning. She'd go rigid. I figured out you had to show her your hands first, let her see them coming, and then she'd allow it, and after a few days she started lifting her own arms to ask. I learned she liked the depot. I had to bring her with me on shift, couldn't leave her alone, and I rigged a sling so she could ride against my chest, and she'd watch the belt with those wide, low eyes, watch the stuff come down, and the first time the mouth groaned and cycled she flinched so hard I thought she'd hurt herself. So I held her and I walked her right up to the drum safe, and I knocked on the metal with my knuckle, knock, knock, and I said, "It's loud, but it can't reach you up here." She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the knocking, and the next time it cycled she only twitched, and the time after that she knocked back. Little fist on the metal, knock, knock, teaching herself it couldn't reach her. I learned she laughed, once, day 3. I dropped a sorting paddle and it clattered and spun and went around twice on the floor like a top, and she made a sound I hadn't heard yet, short, surprised, bright, and slapped her hands on her knees, and it took me a second to understand I was hearing a kid laugh. I picked up the paddle and dropped it again on purpose. She laughed again. I must have dropped that paddle 30 times. I'm telling you these small things because they matter. Because 3 days earlier her own mother had decided she was nothing, a defect, a thing to wrap up and let go of, and here she was learning a door panel and knocking back at a machine and laughing at a spinning paddle. She was the most alive thing on Tier 9. The idea that anyone had looked at her and seen garbage made me feel something I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't anger exactly. It was closer to grief. Grief for a version of her that got believed. On the 4th day, they came for her. I was on shift. Ren was in the sling. The belt was running its mid-cycle pass and I was sorting a load of crating from Tier 3, and the depot door slid open, which it shouldn't have, because nobody comes down to 9. 3 of them came through. 2 were Vethin. Tall, slate gray, the proud ones in the dark layered garments their block favors. But it was the 3rd one that made my stomach drop, because the 3rd one wasn't Vethin. The 3rd one was a galactic compliance officer. I need to explain what that means so you feel it the way I felt it. Station authority handles station business. Compliance is bigger. Compliance enforces treaty law across the whole arm of settled space. The agreements between species, the clauses, the sovereignty rules. When a compliance officer shows up, it means a treaty matter is in play, and it means station authority has already been told to stand aside. They don't bring backup because they don't need backup. The whole weight of 200 signatory species stands behind one compliance uniform. This one was a species I didn't recognize. Heavyset, plated, a face like carved stone, and the gray compliance armor over all of it. Scuffed in the way that tells you it's been worn into real situations. A sidearm on the hip, the legal kind, the kind that comes with paperwork that makes it fine to use. The officer's eyes found the sling against my chest, found the small silver face looking out of it. And in a flat, translated voice, the kind that comes through a Vox unit, all the feeling sanded off, the officer said. Reclamation order. Vethin juvenile, non-viable designation filed and verified. You will surrender the property. Property. Ren had gone rigid in the sling. She couldn't have understood the words, but she'd seen the two Vethin. She knew exactly what they were, and she'd made herself as small and still as she could, the way she must have learned to do 100 times before, and her small hands had found my shirt and twisted into it, hard, the way she'd grabbed my sleeve that first night. She wasn't grabbing on to be saved. I understood that even then. She was holding on the way you hold on to something when you've already accepted it's going to be taken, just to feel it for one more second. The officer held out a slate. The order, filed and verified, legal, airtight. By every law that governed that station, that child was Vethin property and I was a depot worker unlawfully in possession of it. And the smart thing, the safe thing, the only thing a reasonable man does when galactic compliance hands him an order, is hand it over. I looked down at the slate, at the order, at the word property sitting there in flat translated text. Then I looked at the two Vethin standing behind the officer, and I realized I was looking for something in their faces, and what I was looking for was the one who'd wrapped her up, the one who'd folded the fabric neat. I wanted to know which of them it was. I wanted to look at the person who'd done that and let them see what they'd thrown away, 3 days later, alive and learning door panels and knocking back at the mouth. Neither of them would look at me. To them, I was the man who handles the garbage, and the garbage had something of theirs. The belt groaned, the mouth cycled behind me, knock and reset. And I felt Wren's hands twist tighter into my shirt. The officer's translated voice came again, a degree harder. You will surrender the property. This is not a request. You will surrender the property. This is not a request. I want to tell you I had a plan. I didn't. What I had was 11 years of standing in that exact spot, knowing exactly how the law worked down there, and a kid's hands twisted into my shirt. So I did the only thing my brain could do, which was stall. Can I read the order? I asked. The officer's stone face didn't change, but the slate came forward an inch. Compliance likes when you read the order. It means you're going to comply. It means no incident report. I read it, slow, not because I needed to, I'd already seen the word that mattered, but because every second I spent reading was a second Wren was still against my chest. And while I read it, something started to line up in the back of my head. Quiet, like when you're sorting a load and you realize two pieces fit together that came down separately. I looked up, it says property. The designation is non-viable juvenile, the officer said. Vethin internal classification. Under the sovereignty clause, classification is the originating species right. The block has classified the juvenile as property. You are not party to that classification. No, I said, I'm not. I just handle the garbage. One of the Vethin made a small sound, not a word, just air. I think it was the closest thing to agreement I'd get out of them. Then you understand, the officer said. I understand it real well, I said, and I did. That was the thing. They'd come down to the one place on the whole station where I understood the rules better than they did. Here's what I'd put together, standing on that floor. The reclamation order said she was property. Property the block wanted back. But you don't file a reclamation order for something you still own and never lost. You file it for something that left your hands. And the only way she'd left their hands was the chute. They threw her away. I set my hand flat on Wren's back, the way the Corlin medic had set hers on the table, holding something in, and I said to the officer, You enforce treaty law to the letter. That's the job, right? Correct. Then you'll know the waste stream protocol. It's treaty. Every signatory station runs on it, or the garbage doesn't move between species and the whole place chokes in a week. I nodded at the chutes overhead. 40 species, one stream. The only way that works is one rule everybody agreed to a long time ago. You put something in the stream, you've abandoned title to it. You have to. Otherwise, every species could claim everything that ever touched their hands and we'd never crush a single crate. The officer was very still. Compliance officers get still when you say something they have to check. I kept going, calm, Knockandry said calm. So here's my problem with the order. They want to reclaim property, but to reclaim you have to prove continuous title. You have to show you never gave it up. I held the slate back out to the officer. They put her in the chute, wrapped her up and dropped her down the waste stream. By the protocol your treaty enforces, that's abandonment of title. The second she crossed the chute line, she stopped being theirs. The juvenile was disposed of under internal custom, the officer said. Custom is sovereign. Sure, their custom, their block, their business. I'm not touching their custom. I let that sit. But the chute isn't their block. The chute is shared infrastructure. The stream is shared. The second she came down to Tier 9, she wasn't in Vethin jurisdiction anymore. She was in mine. And in mine, recovered material belongs to the operator who pulls it off the belt before the crusher. I knocked my knuckle on the cold metal of the mouth. Knock, knock. I pulled her off the belt before the crusher. By the same law that lets me file salvage on every cracked crate that comes through here, she's recovered salvage. Mine. They can't reclaim her because they didn't lose her. They threw her out. Silence, the belt ran. The mouth groaned and reset. And then I said the part that I think actually did it. I'd been circling it the whole time, and I finally just laid it on the floor between us. There's only two ways this goes, and they don't get to pick both. Either she's a person, in which case throwing her down a waste chute is a body in the stream, and that's not a custom. That's a Class 1 treaty violation, and you're standing in the middle of it asking me to hand the evidence back. I looked at the two Vethin when I said it. They still wouldn't look at me. Or she's property, in which case they abandon title the instant she hit the chute, and she's mine by salvage and your orders got no claim to stand on. Person or property, pick one. Either way she doesn't go back. I'd run out of words. My heart was going so hard I could feel it against Ren's back. The officer didn't move for a long time. Stone face, gray armor scuffed at the shoulder. The two Vethin started to say something fast, layered, their own language, the Vox not even translating it because it wasn't aimed at me, and the officer raised one plated hand and they stopped. Then the officer did the thing that I will respect for the rest of my life, even though everything about that uniform scared me. The officer looked it up. Pulled the protocol. Right there. Read it. The waste stream abandonment clause, the salvage recovery provision, the jurisdiction line on shared infrastructure. I watched those stone eyes move down a slate, and I understood that this was a person whose entire identity was the letter of the law, and I had just handed them a place where the letter of the law and the order in their hand pointed in opposite directions. The Vethin knew it too. One of them stepped forward and said something sharp, and the officer turned, slow, and looked at them with those carved eyes, and said in the language, but the Vox caught it this time, flat and final. The filing classifies the juvenile as property. The block's own classification governs. By that classification, disposal into the common stream constitutes abandonment of title under Waste Stream Protocol, Article 9. Title transferred to the recovering operator at the point of recovery. A pause. The order is void on filing. There is no continuous title to reclaim. The Vethin said something else, louder, and the officer said the last thing, and it's the only time I heard anything in that flat voice that wasn't flat. You may refile the juvenile as a person. I will accept that filing. Be advised it will be forwarded to the Class 1 Review Board with the recovery medical scan attached. The scan reads viable. They didn't refile. Of course they didn't. To get her back they'd have to call her a person, and the second she was a person, they were three people standing over a child they'd thrown in the garbage, in front of the one species in settled space that has never once gotten the memo about leaving well enough alone. They left. The two Vethin went first, fast, not looking at me, not looking at her. The officer went last. At the door the officer stopped, didn't turn all the way around, just enough that I caught the side of that stone face. The Vox said, 11 years on the stream. It wasn't a question. They'd read my file while they read the protocol. Of course they had. 11 years, I said. A beat. Most operators surrender on first instruction. The officer's head tilted, just slightly, the way you look at a thing you can't fully sort. You read the order to buy time. Yeah. You knew the protocol before you read it. Yeah. The officer was quiet a moment. Then, your kind always finds the line in the rules where the rule breaks. We write the rules expecting compliance. We do not write them expecting you. Another pause, and I swear there was something almost tired in it. It makes you difficult to administer. We get that a lot, I said. The door slid shut, and it was just me and the belt and the mouth and a kid who'd gone so still I had to check she was breathing. She was. She'd watched the whole thing without understanding one word of it. But she'd watched the two gray people come, and she'd watched them go, and she'd watched me not let go. I sat down right there on the floor again, same as the first night, and I peeled the sling open so she could see my face, and I don't mind telling you my hands were shaking so bad I could barely do it. Ren looked at me, then she looked at the closed door, then back at me. And she did the thing she did when she wanted to be sure of something. She reached out one small hand, slate going to silver at the fingers, and she pressed it flat against my chest, right over where my heart was still slamming. Held it there, feeling it go. Then she knocked, soft, twice, little fist against my chest. Knock, knock. It's loud, but it can't reach you up here. I knocked back. I won't drag out the after. The after is a lot of forms. It turns out a salvage claim on a living juvenile is a thing that has never happened on Marrow Station, and there is no clean box to tick for it. So it went up tiers, and people I'd never met argued about it in rooms I'll never see. And for about 2 months, I genuinely didn't know if they were going to let me keep her or take her into some station custody arrangement that was just a nicer-shaped chute. The Corlin medic helped. She filed the scan. She wrote in her flat Corlin way that the juvenile presented as viable, social, and developing, and that separation from the recovering operator presented an unacceptable welfare risk. She used the word welfare. The Vethin classification never used that word once. I noticed. In the end, they made up a new category for her, because the system couldn't hold what she was any other way. Not property, not ward of a block. Recovered person, operator-sponsored. I had to take classes. I had to pass a fitness review run by a station counselor who clearly thought a single reclamation worker on Tier 9 was a terrible idea, and who I'd like to formally thank for being wrong. The mobility supports cost less than a week's wages, just like the medic said. A frame, braces, a powered chair for the long hauls. The first time we fit her into the chair and she figured out the control, about 90 seconds, she's sharp, I told you. She went straight across the clinic floor and crashed gently into the far wall and turned around with the brightest look I have ever seen on a face, any species, anywhere. She's fast in that chair. Faster than the kids who got to keep their legs, half the time, because she spent her whole life learning that if she wants to get somewhere she has to move herself, and she's never once forgotten it. She talks now. Both languages picked up hours like she was starving for it, and she keeps the Vethin too, though she'll only use it when she thinks I'm asleep. I let her think I'm asleep. Everybody gets to keep something. She asked me once a few years in where she came from. She was old enough by then. I'd always known the question was on the belt, coming down toward me, and I'd had a long time to decide what I'd grab off it before it hit the mouth. I told her the truth, not all at once and not cruel, but the truth that her first family couldn't see her, and that not being seen is a thing that's wrong with the seer, not the seen. I told her where I found her. I told her about the water in my hand. She thought about it a while. She's a thinker, that one. Then she said, "But you saw me." And I said, "Yeah, I saw you." And she said, "On the belt, before you even unwrapped me. You didn't know what I was. You ran toward the loud part to get me." I hadn't thought about it like that. She had. She'd been carrying that, working it out for years. Yeah, I said, I guess I did. She nodded like that settled something, and went back to whatever she was doing, fast across the floor, knocking her knuckle on the table leg as she passed it. Knock knock. People still ask me about the worst thing I ever pulled out of a reclamation chute. I've got a different answer now than I used to. I tell them it wasn't the worst thing. I tell them it was the only thing down there that was ever worth a damn, and I tell them the whole point of the mouth, the whole reason that machine exists is that it doesn't care what you feed it. It crushes a crate the same as it'd crush a child. It can't tell the difference. It's not built to. That's the part that should scare you, not the machine, the people who looked at her and decided the machine was right. I've been across a lot of settled space since then, dropping her at schools, fighting with boards, sitting in waiting rooms. I've met a lot of species who are stronger than us, and faster than us, and built better than us, and who have got laws so old and so smooth you could skate on them. But I've noticed something. We're the ones who run toward the loud part. Everybody else reads the order and complies. We read the order looking for the line where it breaks. And we don't even do it to be brave. We do it because somewhere down in the bottom tier of whatever we are, there's a thing that hears a sound too thin and too tired to even be a cry, and refuses, flat refuses, to let the universe be the kind of place where nobody comes. Her mother left her in a dumpster because she couldn't walk. She's 17 now. She doesn't walk, she still doesn't. She moves through this world faster than anyone I've ever met. And every door she's ever come to, she's opened in 90 seconds flat, and she has never once in 13 years believed she was anything anyone could throw away. Let them keep their old smooth laws. I'll keep her.